Good afternoon. Well, we're here for another Tell Me a Story, brought to you by the Friends of the Sandwich Town Archives, otherwise known as Foster. My name is Joan Osgood, and I'm a volunteer at Foster. We could not do this, and I think I say this about with every interview that we do, that we could not do this without Sandwich Community TV and their director, Paula Johnson, and so we thank them for being here today. Well, I have been looking forward to this for a long time. We have with us today Mr. and Mrs. Raymond, Alan and Arlene Raymond, and they both, well, they have different experiences. Alan grew up in East Sandwich, and so has a lot of stories and recollections of that. And Arlene grew up in Sandwich proper, in the village of Sandwich. Perhaps we'll start with you, Arlene. Okay. If you could tell us a bit. Now I know that you weren't born in Sandwich.
No, we moved here in 1958 when I was in third grade.
In third grade.
And I became one of the walkers. I walked to and from school every day, so I got to meet and know a lot of the older people in town, and it was very interesting. I walked past the grist mill every day, and I saw them remodel that and turn it into a museum. Mm-hmm. And I used to go in there and pester the people every day.
Oh, did you?
And I saw them turn the Hoxie House into a museum, and I was frequently in there. And that was just a wonderful path to walk home every day. And
yes, yes. Oh, I was going to say, were you late for school with all the, but you stopped on the way back.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, we got there on time in the morning, but on the way home, I dawdled a lot.
Yeah. So you made quite a few friends in doing that.
I did.
Yes.
Yeah. One of them was well, it's not the museum anymore, the Thornton Burgess Museum, but it was, and before that it was a nursing home.
That, yes.
And I became really good friends with an elderly woman there named Peggy Meggs, and she would wait for us coming home from school and talk to us. And one time she actually gifted me her collection of postcards she had saved since she was a child, which I still have. So
Meggs, that is a Sandwich name.
Yeah, well,
M-E-I-G-S.
She grew up in West Barnstable. Her father was a sea captain.
Ah.
So they had the farm that you can see from the Mid-Cape Highway in West Barnstable.
Okay. Yes, as you're coming towards the Sagamore Bridge, it would be on the right?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and that was her family's farm.
Oh, and that's still there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
Yes. I'll be darned. Wow. Why did you come to Sandwich?
Well, my father's family was from Katuitt, and he always loved Sandwich, and he and my mom used to drive on Sunday through the town, and my mother actually saw the Burbank house and had always said that was a house she would love to live in. Mm-hmm. One day when they were on a Sunday drive, there was a for sale sign in front of it, so they bought it.
They didn't wait.
No, they didn't.
Can you tell us where the Burbank house is that you were brought up in?
Yeah, it's right up the street from the town hall. It's like the 5th house on the right. I guess now it's the 6th house on the right.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was owned by George Burbank, who used to run a store on the corner by where the Brown Jug.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they were a family that was from the town for many generations.
Burbanks, yes.
Yeah. So it was a great house to grow up in.
Alan, it's interesting. I always find it's interesting when we talk with someone that grew up in the different villages, because in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, what I found is that you sort of stayed in that village. Yeah. You made the friends, except for going to school. Your friends were from that part of town. Mm-hmm. So now you grew up in East Sandwich. Yes. Tell us a little bit about that, Alan.
Well, I lived in East Sandwich right next door to my paternal grandmother, who at the time was running the post office, and it was more or less, if you go there now, the Whaleback Motel would be on one side, and Clyde Gill's, I guess, son's house Now it would be on the other side. And I would spend most of my time with my maternal grandmother who lived on Old County Road.
Ah,
So growing up, my mother was working. She worked at the post office. My father was teaching school.
Yeah.
So, grandparents were the default babysitter.
yes.
So,
As it sometimes, well, more than sometimes happens now. Your mother, I believe, was native to the town.
Yes.
Your father not. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how they happened to get together and marry?
Well, my father showed up in Sandwich as a result of the Depression. His father worked as a salesman for Gulf Oil. They lived in Belmont, nice neighborhood, old Victorian house. And when times got tough, my grandfather, who was a very self-reliant guy, said, "We're going to move to the Cape. Land's cheap. I can buy a lot of land." They bought a house with a cow and some chickens. And my grandmother opened up a restaurant and became the postmaster, and they were self-sufficient. But he never lost his job either, so
Yes.
they made it through the Depression. My mother, she lived further down the road. They were living in the Nye house at the time because my maternal grandfather ran the fish hatchery, and as a part of the agreement for the supervisor of the hatchery, you got to live in the Nye house, which was part of that whole parcel there on Old County Road. My mother and her brother both were born in the Nye house.
Now, what was your mother's maiden
My
name?
mother was a fish,
Okay.
and she grew up in that little village. And I've got some photographs of all the East Sandwich kids at once. Jack Jilson, Jackie Snow, Bob White, Jack White, all the Stan Torrey. There
yes.
wasn't that many kids in East Sandwich back in that era. And coming along, I kind of got used to it, knew who everybody was. My grandfather retired from the hatchery. Of course, he had bought a house in the late 40s on
Now, your grandfather's name, Alan.
Alfred C. Fish.
Okay.
And he retired in 58 and only lived a year after he retired. He died of cancer. And my grandmother sold the farm. They owned the big, well, it's where Fish House Road goes in now. There's a house and a barn, and they developed it, and the land went on to the other side of the Mid-Cape Highway.
Oh, wow. Huge parcel.
Yeah.
She sold that and moved in with her brother up in Athol. Okay. So that was the
Now,
end
you talked about your grandmother having a restaurant.
Now, that was my other grandmother.
Okay,
So
on the other side.
we're flipping back between
Yeah, right. And her
maternal
name-
and paternal here.
Exactly, but they're old.
Yeah.
All of them have very old Sandwich roots.
Yeah.
So her name, the grandmother with the restaurant.
My grandmother was Jean Ross Raymond. She kept her maiden name as her middle name, and my grandfather was Chester Raymond. And
Okay.
he worked over at the base, and he also worked for Ted Liberty in the hardware store.
Oh, he did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, where was the hardware store at that point?
It was where McDonald's was.
Yep. Right there on Jarvis Street.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I remember going in there as a kid with my father, and my father would be talking to either Ted Liberty or Jack Liberty, and I'm sitting there bored and everything. So Ted would give me a hammer and say, "Go around, and all these nails that are sticking up, pound them back in the floor." So I would spend my next 10 or 15 minutes pounding nails back into the floor.
Yeah, Liberty. Of course, their lineage goes back in town also. I always wondered whether Liberty Street was named after them, but I've never been able to find that out.
Yeah.
The restaurant. Do you know the name of the restaurant?
Raymond's.
Raymond's Restaurant.
It was
Now,
right-
where was it situated?
It was the house I grew up in, because when my father got married, my grandfather says, "Well, we're not using a restaurant anymore. Remodel the restaurant into your home," and that
yeah.
became our house. It's right there on 6A.
Okay. Do you know the number?
372 was the house up here, so it'd be either 370 or
We didn't have
372 or
numbers back
374,
then.
depending on whether the numbers go east or west. I
Yeah.
don't know.
We didn't have house numbers when we were
Well,
there.
well, isn't that true?
Yeah, because the house I grew up in, it was just known as the Burbank House on Old Main Street.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
we have old envelopes that were addressed to my parents, and it would just say, "Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Old Main Street," and we'd get the mail.
Yeah.
And I think it was in the 70s where they gave us a street number.
I can't recall. Yeah. So did your father start teaching Ross Raymond in the high school right away?
Yes, 1946.
Okay. When did he marry your mother?
1946.
Okay. Everything happened in 1946.
Except me. I come along 2 years later.
Did you? Yes. Yeah. And so he did start teaching at we'll call it now, the old Henry T. Wing School. Yeah. I know. A look of sadness. I know.
I think my father and Ed Zion both started the same year.
Mm-hmm. Were they both out of college? They were young men.
Well, my father graduated from high school at the Wing School in '39, went to Highness Teachers College and was drafted his junior year there. And when he got out of the Army in '45, he got his teaching credentials together and became a teacher in '46. So
he saw action in World War II.
Yeah.
But obviously came home. Okay, thank God. What subjects did he teach?
Math, science, shop, mechanical drawing, and driver.
Yeah, in those days, you just didn't have one thing to teach. The teachers were, multifaceted. Yeah. Yes. Arlene, you told me, I think, a most charming story about you and Alan in the lunchroom, in the old lunchroom of the Henry T. Wing School. Would you share that with us?
Well, it's my first real memory of him. He was in 5th grade and I was in 3rd grade. And we had the little lunchroom in the old school in the basement that you really ate in small shifts because it was so small.
So small.
So the 3rd graders were supposed to eat and then leave, and then the older kids came in, and him being a 5th grader, he was one of the older kids.
Oh boy, yes.
And I was still slow eater, sitting at the table with a friend, Tracy, and
who were you sitting with?
Tracy Phelan.
Okay, Tracy Phelan.
And she was across from me, and I remember Alan came in with some of the bigger kids, and he sat across from me. And he said something funny that made me laugh, and milk came out my nose. For the whole rest of my years in high school, Tracy would always remind you. Remember when Alan Raymond made milk come out your nose? Everybody always thought that was pretty funny.
Yes.
So I always remembered him. And then years later, he got in touch with me when I was in my 60s. And that was one of my first thoughts. And I told him, I said, I remember when that happened.
Yes.
Yeah, talk about a first impression.
But it sounds like you were a bit smitten with him even back then.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. And the lovely story is that you finally did get together.
Yes. Yeah, many years later.
Yes. Yeah.
We've been married now for almost 7 years.
Yeah, it'll be 7 in February.
Yes. Now, Arlene, why did your family come to Sandwich? And can you explain a little bit about your family, your mom, your dad?
Well, my mother grew up in North Attleboro, and she went to Framingham College. And in the summer, she worked at a resort in Kituitt as a waitress. And that's how she met my dad. And he was actually, he was a student at Becker Junior College in Worcester. And he was home for the summer working for a coal delivery. And my mother and her roommate had decided to hitchhike to Falmouth. And my father knew the roommate because she was from Worcester, so he stopped and picked them up. So that's how they met.
And so that's how,
And so like I said, they always loved Sandwich and just wanted. But my dad was in the National Guard. He was full-time National Guard. Mm-hmm. And so he was the head of the battalion on the southeastern Massachusetts.
Was he stationed at the base?
No, his office was in the armory, the Buzzards Bay Armory.
Oh, okay.
In Warren.
Yeah. What I thought was very interesting when we chatted a little while back is that you had a donkey.
We did. We had goats. The Burbank house came with the great barn. That was one of my best favorite parts of that property. It was a huge barn. And so, we had goats.
And so you filled it.
We did. We had goats, and we had a donkey who turned out to be very mean.
Oh.
And, my father thought he was going to be a pet that we were going to be able to ride, but as soon as you got on his back, he'd head for the nearest tree and try to brush you off.
Oh, no. Okay. So we never saw you riding up Java Street or anything
No,
on.
you didn't.
Okay. No, we didn't.
But the
Okay.
neighbors heard him. He made a horrific noise, and a lot of people didn't appreciate Gordo.
Yeah, Gordo, yeah. You had mentioned, Alan, about your grandfather working at the fish hatchery.
Yes.
Can you tell us some stories about that?
Well, he started there very, very early in his, I guess you would call it a career. I don't know, but it was like around 1915. He was a little bit too old for World War I, and he started at the fish hatchery because looking back through some of the old records and talking to people like John Cullity, my great-grandfather, my grandmother Fish's father, who was John Armstrong, one of the Carltons and one of the Nyes, I guess, started the fish hatchery. So my grandfather
Oh, did they?
was a little bit younger, and he went to work there, and he worked his way up through the ranks and was the superintendent, I guess you'd
Yes.
call it, of the hatchery. And as a kid, I remember going there and, looking at the fish. There was giant fish there.
Yeah.
And everything.
And they would start. Are they doing that now?
I don't think there's anything going on there.
I don't.
It's all part of the Nye
Yes.
Museum now, and the
Yes.
stuff on the west side of the place, I think, is just sitting abandoned.
Yeah, yeah. So, what relationship? I'm still trying to get. Were you to the Armstrongs?
My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, Ruth Fish, was an Armstrong.
Armstrong. Okay.
Her father was John Armstrong, and he was one of, I think, maybe 5 brothers. Lindsay Armstrong's father was one brother. My grandmother's father was a brother. There was a George Armstrong that had a place that was cabins down on Beach Road. And
Oh,
then there was
okay.
David Armstrong that had the big house over on 6A that is now Spring Meadow Farm, they call it,
Yep,
I guess.
yep.
So.
Okay. Okay. Now, tell us a little bit about your life as you grew up. You're probably retired now.
Yes.
But what did you do?
What have I done? I've done a lot of things over the years. And, you kind of do what you need to do to
Yeah.
put money in your pocket. In high school, I worked for Florence Moore down at the pilot shack for 2 summers, summers 65 and 66.
And where was the pilot shack for people that are, where was that located?
That was right on the corner of the basin. We call the marina, the basin back then. And right up in the corner where the commercial fishing boats are, where the road cuts around, the pilot shack was an old, I guess it was a building that came from the base.
Probably.
That Charlie Dalton had bought and fixed it up a little bit, and Florence would rent that every summer. And
Charlie Dalton, boy, that's an old name.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she had a
snack bar.
snack bar there. What did you do?
Waited on tables, fried hamburgers, got sodas, made fraps, whatever you need to do.
Everything. Yeah. So then you moved on from there.
Actually, during that summer, $1 an hour didn't pay for gas for a gas guzzling car. So I would work for a guy named Joe Beckoff who had a fish business. And me and Brad Moore, we'd unload fishing boats and work after school packing fish that was going to New York City and stuff like that. And
Now, can you explain where Joe Beckoff's on the canal was?
that is the little spit of land that cuts out along the canal. The marina cuts in behind it, and it's right where the entrance comes off the canal. It was right out there on that spit. There was a building, and we'd unload boats and had a little ice freezer, and we'd ship fish and stuff like that.
Yeah. So that would be. What about the restaurant that's there now? The
That's on the other side. That was over where the freezer was, on the
right.
other side of
That was the Bassett's freezer.
The Bassett,
the
right.
Bassett family.
Yeah.
And so Joe Beckoff's was across the open to the basin there. Yeah. So what did you do after that?
The summer of '67, I was working down the canal a little bit for a company called Canal Lobster. And I worked there. We were unloading lobster boats and packing lobsters and shipping lobsters. And I got fish poisoning really bad, and my
Really?
thumb swole up, and I said, I'm done with this. I went to work for Dennis Newman's father, painting houses, and I finished that summer of '67 doing that, and then those were bad times.
Yeah.
I'm 1A, I'm graduated from high school. I don't want to get drafted, so I went down and saw the Army recruiter.
You did?
Yeah.
Yep. And you joined?
Yeah, I joined the Army in that September.
Did you, where were you stationed?
I took basic training in Fort Bragg, was sent to Fort Rucker, Alabama, which is no longer. They're all been renamed. Anyway, went to Army Aviation School, and when I got out of there, I was sent to Fort Wainwright, which is Fairbanks, Alaska, and I was in a helicopter unit there for a year and a half.
Okay.
Spent 18 months there, yeah. I'm just trying to get the chronology here. Anyway, come back to the States, spent a few months down in Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, and was excess, and they sent me to Germany for like 7 months, and then I got out. Never went to Vietnam, especially as a helicopter mechanic. I dodged that bullet, literally and figuratively speaking.
So that, you spent a lot of your career as a mechanic, did you not, on helicopters, planes, whatever?
After I got out of the Army, I worked as a construction laborer. I got married. My children were born and everything. But then construction kind of went bad. I went to civilian aircraft maintenance school up in Bedford, Mass. Got my civilian mechanics license, and I worked starting out at Plymouth Airport. I worked there for 20 years as a mechanic. And I was also in the National Guard in the aviation unit that was out here at Otis. So I kind of
did both.
Did both.
Arlene, what about you, so people have an idea? After you graduated from high school, how did you, what were the next few years for you?
I got married, and about 4 years later, I had a daughter, and then 2 years later, had a son. And after about 10 years of being married, there was a divorce. And after that, I went to college and became a dental hygienist. And so I lived in West Yarmouth for 30 years. I raised my 2 kids there as a single mom, and was able to buy my home, and worked for 20 years for the same dentist in Centerville.
Yeah.
And loved my job.
And when did you retire? After 20 years?
I was forced to retire because I had arthritis really bad in my hands and had to have
and that would
surgery on my thumbs, so
Yeah.
I couldn't manipulate the instruments anymore.
No, yeah.
So then I got retrained as an ophthalmic technician, and I worked doing eye exams for quite a few years. And then I retired from that to take care of my mother, who was living with me. And then my daughter had children, and she had twins, and so I was taking care of my mom and her kids.
Yes.
And then after my mom passed away, I thought it might be nice to meet somebody. I hadn't even been on a date in 30 years. And I put my name in that app, Our Time, an online dating thing. And I got some really strange people would respond. And so I had suspended my membership to that. And they had sent me a notice saying my membership was up. Did I want to renew it? And I thought, well, I'll just go back on. I had like a week left. I thought, I'll turn it back on for a week. And that's when he found me.
Yeah,
But he was in Ohio at the time.
Yeah,
So
it was certainly meant to be.
it was meant to be.
Yes, yeah, way back from 3rd grade and the milk incident, yes.
And
all
when
these
you're
years
on those apps, there are no names given. He just saw my picture, and it said that I grew up in Sandwich.
Oh, so he recognized you, yeah.
No,
No,
I didn't
he
recognize
didn't.
her. Who is that? I gotta know who it is, but I don't
But
know
he
who
sent
it
me a
is.
thing saying, I grew up in Sandwich. We must know each other. And
Yeah.
I didn't recognize his picture.
Yeah.
So I had sent his picture to a friend and said, Who
Who is this?
Can't trust anything online today, so you gotta check it all out.
So he said,
Although it worked for you too.
he said even though he was in Ohio, he was coming to visit a cousin in on the Cape, and would I like to have him stop by and say hi? And I was like, sure. So we've been together ever since.
That's a great story. People that are watching this video might be wondering, what is this thing? It looks like a gravestone sitting in front of you. This is a wonderful story. Can you tell us about this, Alan?
Well, it started years ago carving ducks. I was completely fascinated with old duck decoys, and I spent many years carving them. And last few years, my shoulders are bad, and I can't use a draw knife anymore and stuff. And I said, I got to find something else to do. And meanwhile, we've been doing ancestry work and going to old cemeteries and stuff. And I found this fascination with the old 18th century gravestones. I said, I got to see if I can do that. So I said, what am I going to do it on? So I practiced on a couple pieces of old slate flagstone that were, walkways at the house. Oh, I can do that. So I got to find a good piece of slate. And there was a man up in Sagamore Beach, had a free pool table that was an inch thick slate. And I go, I could probably use that. And it was free. So I went up and saw him, and we were going to put it in my truck, but nobody could lift it. So the guy said to me, well, it's free, but if you want, I'll have it delivered to your house for $100. So I said, well, that's better than, breaking my back. So it showed up, and I've got to figure out how to cut this thing out. So I played around with some of the tools I had and cut and smoothed.
Now tell me, the model for this, tell me about that. The model for this tombstone.
This tombstone was based on one that I had seen right here in our old burial ground on Grove Street.
Okay.
And it is in such disrepair that I said, well, carving something, that's make-believe with a fake name and a fake day, you don't really put the effort into something that was actual. In reality, you want to keep it as original as possible. So I started plugging away on this, and when it turned out decent, I go, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with now, and it's not like I can hang it on the wall.
We have a gravestone.
What do you do with a gravestone?
That's when I approached you and June Murphy, and the process began on donating it to the town as a replacement stone, which is in the works and is supposed to be put in the cemetery tentatively, weather permitting, on July 8th.
I think Jennifer Madden was quite helpful to you also, wasn't she? She's on the Sandwich Historical Commission also,
she
along with June
has
Murphy.
been my point of contact through this whole thing.
And they recently let him know they're going to take the original stone that's in pieces and bury it there.
Oh.
So
it'll be buried right on
they're
top
gonna
of the
keep it
grave,
there.
like 4 inches below grade. That way, I guess, for any
Archival
archaeological
reason.
future stuff, it'll be there to.
Yeah. So this actually is an exact replica.
It is.
I went up there, I measured, I made 3 or 4 trips, I drew it in paper, I double checked the dimensions. And
Now, it is, can we just in case it doesn't show up that well in the video, could you read what it says, please?
it says, here lies the body of Mrs. Mary Bourne, wife to Mr. Nathan Bourne, and I guess the old stone carver couldn't write the whole word deceased, so he put D-E-C with a smaller uppercase D.
Yeah.
December ye 18th, 1733, in ye 58th year of her age.
It's interesting the way that they
Yeah,
wrote
the
in those.
verbiage on those is
Yes.
very different.
Yes, yes. You said that it's sort of like a hobby for you, isn't
It
it?
is.
Going to graveyards and looking at.
Yeah, we found out going into the graveyards and looking information up on Find a Grave that a lot of people request photos of family members' gravestones. And so I volunteered and I now do that. I upload photographs of graves, not just old ones, but even, recent ones.
Oh, so when you go on Ancestry, it says find a grave,
Yeah.
and if you click on that, you can see the. So you take the pictures for them.
I do.
Oh, gee, that's wonderful, Arlene. Yeah, you had told me a story. Either one of you had told me a story. Can't remember quite now of your favorite gravestone.
It's got to be she done what she could.
Yeah.
There's a great cemetery near us in Dennis on Fisk Street, and this man It's
Kelly.
Kelly.
It's a Kelly.
He has this great big obelisk, marble, huge thing. And then down below, there's this little stone on the top. It says Mother. And on the front, it just says, she done what she could.
She done what she could.
I just think that's so horrible.
Yeah. Oh, well, this has been wonderful. I do want to give you a chance. Are there any stories that you would like to tell that I haven't asked you about?
Well, my life in Sandwich was up through the year 2000. My first wife and I moved to Florida in 2000, and I spent 14 years there. I worked as an aircraft mechanic for a aircraft engine rebuilder down there. I was the guy that used to run the engines when they were completed to make sure everything was...
To make sure the plane stayed in the air.
Oh, I didn't work
Sort
on
of
any
important.
planes. I just worked on engines. We would rebuild engines and ship them out to people with airplanes.
I see.
And then my first wife passed away like a week after or maybe it was a month after I retired. And there was no more reason to stay in Florida. And I went and lived with my son in Ohio. And that's how I got involved with the Our Time group. And I did all my searching on the Cape. I said, I don't want to find anybody out here. I want to get back to the Cape.
Yes. So it did pull you. The Cape and Sandwich pulled you.
I always had this thing in my mind that I'd like to meet somebody that I know, that we have a common past, that would be, you know, a comfortable relationship. And it just happened to work out that way. So,
As we sort of wind up, what would you say to future generations? I mean, who knows? Someone might be watching this video 50 years from now or more. What would you like to tell someone, say 50 years from now or more, about the town of Sandwich?
well, I have to stay on the same subject, and I have noticed, like I said, the old cemeteries in town, there is quite a bit of neglect on them. Town of Yarmouth, they have Friends of the Ancient Cemetery, and there's people down there every weekend planting flowers and cleaning gravestones and mowing and having restoration work done and stuff like that. And our graveyard here in town on the pond is a quintessential early American graveyard, and it's got prime examples of the early carvers.
Yes.
It should show some more respect than it does. It's a history museum and an art museum all kind of rolled into one, just sitting out there on the pond.
Yeah,
So
sort of decaying, yeah,
you know.
yeah. Well, this has been wonderful. I am so glad we finally got together. And
I had to have something interesting to talk about. I consider
Yeah,
my life boring.
No. We tried to get together a few years ago, and Alan called me up and said, "No, I'm too boring. You know, I don't have any stories." Well, guess what?
Well,
You
there's
do.
a lot of stories, but I don't repeat them. Things that I shouldn't have done and stuff like that. Right?
Well, thank you for joining us. This is the end of our nice time here with Arlene and Alan Raymond, and we look forward to having another Tell Me a Story in the future. Thanks again to SCTV. Bye-bye.